America in the 1960s was obsessed with going fast in a straight line. The muscle car wars were in full swing, with every manufacturer trying to cram the biggest, most fire-breathing V8 under the longest hood possible. Horsepower was king, and styling was an afterthought. You got your big chrome grille, your tail fins if you were lucky, and your headlights, those big, glassy, bug-eyed rounds staring down the road. That was the formula. That was what the customer expected. Then Buick decided to do something that made absolutely no sense. In 1965, Buick unveiled the redesigned Riviera. It was a personal luxury car, a four-seater with a long hood and a fastback roofline. On paper, it was exactly what the doctor ordered for the affluent buyer. But when the car arrived on showroom floors, it wasn't the engine that stopped people in their tracks. It was the face. Or rather, the lack of one. The 1965 Buick Riviera had no visible headlights. They were there, but you couldn't see them. Where the headlights should have been was a smooth, uninterrupted sheet of chrome and grille work. It looked futuristic, almost like a concept car that had accidentally rolled out of the factory. And the way you exposed those lights? You didn't flip them up like a Corvette. You didn't swing them sideways. You pulled a knob on the dashboard, and with a groan of vacuum-actuated servos, the entire chrome grille dropped downward, pulling the headlights with it, revealing them like a mechanical shutter opening over a pair of hidden eyes. It was a jaw-dropping, utterly bizarre engineering decision that completely contradicted the industry's obsession with brute force. But why? Why would an American automaker choose to hide something as fundamental as a headlight behind a drop-down mechanical curtain? It was risky. It was complex. It was expensive. And it created a problem that engineers are still trying to figure out today. To understand the why, you have to understand the who. The man responsible was Bill Mitchell, the legendary head of design at General Motors. Mitchell was an artist. He hated big, clunky headlights. He thought they ruined the clean lines of a car's front end. He saw them as warts on a beautiful face, and he was determined to eliminate them. He wanted a clean look that would make the Riviera look like a single, sculpted piece of metal rolling down the highway. He didn't want the car to look like it was blinking at you. He wanted it to look like a shark gliding through the water. The engineering team was given a mandate: make the headlights disappear. But there was a catch. It had to be done with vacuum tubes. In the 1960s, cars didn't have the powerful electric motors we have today. There were no microchips. To automate a system, you used engine vacuum. It worked fine for power brakes and door locks, but pulling a heavy metal grille down with nothing but air pressure? That was a tall order. The problem was obvious, the solution wasn't. The engineering team at Buick stared at Mitchell's design sketches and collectively felt their stomachs drop. They had a beautiful car that looked like a missile, and they had to figure out how to make its face drop off every time the sun went down. The obvious solution was an electric motor, a simple gear-driven mechanism to rotate the grille downward. But electric motors in the mid-60s were bulky, slow, and expensive. They also drained the battery. On a luxury car loaded with power seats, windows, and air conditioning, adding another heavy electrical draw was a non-starter. So they turned to vacuum. The engine, a 425 cubic inch V8 producing 360 horsepower, created a massive amount of negative pressure as it sucked in air. That pressure was essentially a free source of energy. All they had to do was harness it. The plan was elegantly simple in theory, terrifyingly complex in execution. They would mount the entire headlight housing and the chrome grille as one unit, hinged at the bottom. When you pulled the dashboard knob, a vacuum signal would open a valve, sending that negative pressure to a set of rubber diaphragms. These diaphragms would contract, pulling a linkage that rotated the grille forward and downward by about 45 degrees. When the grille was down, the headlights would be fully exposed, shining through the empty space where the chrome bars used to be. Push the knob back in, and a spring would pull the grille back up into its sleek, hidden position. It was a mechanical puppet, dancing on air. But solving that problem created another one. The headlights were now behind a grille. The first issue was airflow. The engine needed air to breathe. If the grille was sealed when the lights were off, the engine would overheat or choke. So the grille had to be perforated, allowing air to pass through even when it was in the up position. But that meant the headlights were hidden behind a mesh. When they were on, the light had to pass through that mesh. The engineers quickly realized that standard sealed beam headlights were too dim. The grille would diffuse the light, scattering it in weird directions, making the car dangerously invisible at night. Their solution was a stroke of pure genius. They gave the headlights a high and low setting that didn't just tilt the beam downward. They introduced a hidden second set of high beams, 4 headlights in total, that were strategically positioned so that when the grille dropped, they would fire through the widest gaps in the chrome. It was an engineering puzzle within a puzzle, a riddle wrapped in chrome. And then came the question of reliability. Vacuum systems in the 1960s were notoriously finicky. A single rubber hose with a pinhole leak could render the entire system useless. If you were parked, the engine would be off, which meant no vacuum. The grille would stay up. If you had a vacuum leak, the grille might drop halfway, giving you a car that looked like it was slowly winking at you. The engineers tested the system relentlessly, driving prototypes through dust storms and rain, measuring the performance of the diaphragms, and designing a vacuum reservoir tank that would hold enough pressure for a few up and down cycles even with the engine off. They were trying to turn a flawed concept into a reliable mechanical ballet. And somehow, against all odds, they made it work. The 1965 Riviera rolled off the assembly line, and automotive journalists were stunned. They had never seen anything like it. The drop-down headlights weren't just a gimmick, they became the defining feature of the car's character. It was a paradox. In an era of blatant, aggressive styling, Buick had built a car that was shy, demure, hiding its eyes until the driver commanded otherwise. It was beautiful. It was groundbreaking. But the engineers weren't finished yet. The engineers had solved the mechanical puzzle. The grille dropped. The lights illuminated. The car looked like $1 million. But now they faced a challenge that no amount of vacuum tubing could fix: the owner's manual. You see, the 1965 Buick Riviera's drop-down headlight system was incredibly sensitive. It required exacting maintenance. The rubber vacuum hoses had to be inspected regularly. The diaphragms needed to be lubricated. The springs that pulled the grille back up into its resting position had to be perfectly tensioned. If any of these components failed, the system would stick. And when it stuck in the most embarrassing way possible. Imagine you're a successful executive, cruising down a boulevard in your sleek, $4,500 Riviera. You pull up to a valet, reach down, and pull the headlight knob. Nothing happens. You pull it again. The grille drops an inch, then stops, leaving the headlights partially obscured and the car looking like it's squinting. You get out of the car, walk around the front, and there it is, your beautiful, futuristic luxury coupe looks like it has a mechanical lazy eye. You have to open the hood, find the manual release lever, and physically force the grille back into place while people are watching. It was, to put it mildly, a social disaster. This was the dirty secret of the vacuum system. It wasn't that the engineers had designed a bad mechanism, they had designed a mechanism that was ahead of the maintenance culture of the time. The average American car owner in 1965 didn't check their vacuum hoses. They checked the oil and filled the gas tank. Anything beyond that was a trip to the dealership. And the dealerships weren't exactly thrilled about working on these systems either. The mechanics at Buick dealerships hated the drop-down headlights. They were complicated, time-consuming, and required specialized knowledge that most mechanics didn't have. If a customer brought in a Riviera with a stuck grille, the mechanic would spend hours tracing vacuum lines, testing diaphragms, and adjusting linkages, all while the car was taking up a bay that could have been used for 4 oil changes. The system was a nightmare for service departments, and the service departments began to complain loudly to the factory. But the real problem wasn't the maintenance, it was the temperature. The drop-down mechanism was mounted directly behind the grille, which meant it was in the direct path of the engine's heat and the elements. Over time, the rubber diaphragms would harden and crack. The springs would lose their tension. The pivot points would rust. The system was aging in dog years, and by the time the car was 5 years old, many of them were simply stuck in the up position, never to be dropped again. Owners would just leave the headlights exposed permanently, defeating the entire purpose of the design. They would rather have a car that looked slightly weird than a car that looked broken. And yet, despite all these flaws, the 1965 Riviera was a commercial success. Buick sold over 34,000 of them that year. The drop-down headlights were a talking point, a showroom attraction that drew people in. People bought the car because it was different, because it was bold, because it was a statement. The headlights were part of that mystique. They were a symbol of an era when automakers weren't afraid to try something completely insane just to see if it would work. But the honeymoon wouldn't last. The engineers at Buick were about to learn a brutal lesson about the economics of complexity. By 1966, the writing was on the wall. The drop-down headlight system was a mechanical marvel, but it was also a financial albatross. Each Riviera cost significantly more to produce than a standard car because of the complex vacuum assembly, the specialized diaphragms, and the hours of labor required to install and test the mechanism. The profit margin was shrinking, and the complaints from dealers were growing louder by the day. The engineering team at Buick had a choice to make. They could double down on the system, refine it, and try to make it bulletproof for the next generation. Or they could abandon it and go back to the tried-and-true fixed headlights that everyone else was using. For Bill Mitchell, the designer who had championed the system, there was no choice. He wanted to keep it. He believed that the drop-down headlights were the soul of the Riviera, the very thing that set it apart from every other car on the road. He fought tooth and nail to keep them alive. But the accountants had a different perspective. They looked at the warranty claims, the service bulletins, and the cost of replacement parts. They saw a system that was hemorrhaging money. And they knew that the 1966 model year was coming up fast. Mitchell eventually had to concede defeat, but he refused to abandon the concept entirely. Instead, he proposed a compromise. They would change the way the headlights dropped. Instead of the entire grille dropping down, they would design a separate, smaller assembly that rotated sideways, like the hidden headlights on a Corvette. It would be simpler, more reliable, and cheaper to produce. But the engineering team had already moved on. They had spent 2 years wrestling with the vacuum system, and they were exhausted. The thought of designing another complex mechanism, even a simpler one, was too much. So Mitchell made a decision that would change the course of automotive history. He picked up the phone and called an outside supplier, a small engineering firm in Detroit that specialized in unusual mechanisms. He told them his idea, and they told him it was impossible. The timeline was too short. The budget was too tight. Mitchell didn't care. He gave them 6 months and a blank check. What the supplier came back with was nothing short of astonishing. Instead of using vacuum, they used an electric motor and a gear-driven system. It was slower than the vacuum system, taking about 5 seconds to cycle, but it was far more reliable. The motor was mounted behind the grille, and it turned a series of gears that rotated the headlight assemblies out of the car's body. It was like a mechanical smile opening up. Mitchell was thrilled. He had his hidden headlights, and they worked. But there was a catch. The electric motor system was heavier than the vacuum system. It added nearly 15 pounds to the front of the car, which affected the handling. The gears also had a tendency to bind in cold weather, making the headlights stick halfway through their rotation. Mitchell didn't care. He was going to use them anyway. The 1966 Riviera would have a new kind of hidden headlight, and the world would be amazed. But when the car was unveiled, the reaction was muted. The sideways rotating headlights were neat, but they didn't have the same wow factor as the drop-down grille. They felt like a compromise, a watered-down version of the original. The magic was gone. And Buick's sales began to slip. The Riviera was still a beautiful car, but it had lost its defining feature. It was just another luxury coupe in a sea of luxury coupes. The engineers had solved the technical problems, but they had inadvertently killed the car's soul. They had a working system, but it was completely insane in its own way. The 1966 Riviera's electric hideaway headlights worked. They were reliable, they were simple, and they cost less to produce. But something had been lost in the translation. The drop-down grille had been a spectacle, a mechanical theater that transformed the car's entire face. The sideways rotating units were just headlights that disappeared. They didn't make you gasp. They didn't make you run your hand along the chrome, wondering how it all worked. They were just another clever feature in a world full of clever features. And that's when the engineering team realized a bitter truth: they hadn't just built a mechanical system. They had built a story. The drop-down headlights weren't a feature, they were an experience. They were a conversation starter. They were the reason people bought the car. And without them, the Riviera was just another car. But the story doesn't end there. Because even as Buick was moving away from the drop-down system, the engineers who had built it were already thinking about what could have been. They had learned so much from the project. They had pioneered new vacuum technologies, developed better diaphragms, and created a reservoir system that could hold vacuum for days. They had figured out how to route vacuum lines through tight engine bays without kinking them. They had discovered that a simple spring-loaded bypass valve could prevent the grille from sticking. They had a treasure trove of knowledge that could have made the system perfect. But the accountants had already made their decision. So the drop-down headlights of the 1965 Riviera became a ghost. A one-year wonder. A beautiful, flawed, utterly fascinating anomaly in the history of American automotive engineering. They were a testament to the madness of design, the clash between artistry and practicality, and the sheer stubbornness of engineers who refused to accept that something couldn't be done. And they left behind a legacy that is still being felt today. Look at modern cars. The Tesla Model S has hidden door handles that extend when you approach the car. The Ford GT has active aerodynamics that adjust to the driving conditions. The Porsche 918 Spyder has an electric exhaust system that opens and closes depending on the engine note. All of these systems owe a debt to the 1965 Buick Riviera. They are part of a lineage of automotive theater, of engineers who understood that a car isn't just a machine, it's a performance. And the best performances have moments of pure, unexpected magic. But the drop-down headlights also taught a harsh lesson about the limits of innovation. They proved that even the most brilliant engineering solution can fail if it doesn't consider the human factor. The vacuum system was mechanically sound, but it required a level of care that the average driver simply wasn't willing to give. It was a masterpiece of engineering that had forgotten about the person behind the wheel. And in the end, that's what killed it. The 1965 Riviera with its drop-down headlights is now a collector's dream. A pristine example can fetch over $100,000 at auction. The system is so rare, so fragile, that owners treat it like a vintage watch, meticulously maintaining every hose and diaphragm. They are the guardians of a mechanical secret, the keepers of a flame that burned brightly for just one brief, glorious year. They know that their car is special, not because it's fast, or because it's luxurious, but because it has a face that can disappear. And that's the true mystery of the 1965 Buick Riviera. It wasn't about the headlights at all. It was about what happens when engineers are given permission to dream. The drop-down headlight system was never the most practical solution. It wasn't the cheapest. It wasn't the easiest to maintain. It was, by almost every measure, the wrong way to solve the problem. And yet, the engineers at Buick built it anyway. They built it because Bill Mitchell asked them to. They built it because they wanted to see if it could be done. They built it because they were curious. That curiosity is the beating heart of automotive innovation. It's what gave us the Chrysler turbine car, the Tucker 48, the Corvette Stingray. It's what pushes engineers to ask, what if, even when the answer seems obvious? The drop-down headlights were a failure in the traditional sense, but they were a triumph of the human spirit. They remind us that sometimes the most beautiful things in the world are the ones that don't quite work. The ones that are a little too complicated. The ones that make us stop and wonder. Today, if you're lucky enough to see a 1965 Riviera at a car show, watch what happens when the owner pulls the dashboard knob. The crowd gathers. People lean in. There's a collective intake of breath as the grille slowly, majestically drops down. It's not fast. It's not silent. There's a whir of vacuum, a click of linkages, a groan of old metal. And then, suddenly, the car has eyes. The crowd applauds. They always applaud. Because they've just witnessed something that no modern car can replicate: pure, unfiltered mechanical theater. The engineers who built that system are mostly gone now. They've retired, or passed on, taking their knowledge with them. But their legacy lives on in every hidden headlight, every retractable door handle, every active aerodynamic element that emerges from a car's body at speed. They proved that a car doesn't have to be static. It can be dynamic. It can be alive. It can have a secret. And that secret is what makes the Riviera so unforgettable. It wasn't a car that hit its headlights, it was a car that hit its heart. The vacuum system, the diaphragms, the springs, the linkages, they were all expressions of a single, driving idea: that a car should surprise you. That it should make you smile. That it should do something that you didn't expect. The 1965 Buick Riviera with the drop-down headlights is a piece of history that almost didn't happen. It was a fluke, a happy accident of design and ego and engineering desperation. And it stands as a monument to the beautiful, infuriating, utterly human desire to do something different. The accountants won in the end. They always do. But for one brief moment, the engineers won too. And the world was better for it. So the next time you see a car with hidden headlights, think of the men in Detroit who wrestled with vacuum hoses and rubber diaphragms, who stayed up late in the engineering lab, trying to figure out how to make a grill disappear. They didn't succeed perfectly. But they succeeded enough. They succeeded just enough to make us all wonder. And that, in the end, is the real engineering mystery. Not how they did it, but why they tried. Because they knew that some things are worth building, even if they don't last. Some things are worth remembering, even if they're broken. Some things are worth telling stories about. The 1965 Buick Riviera is one of those things. It's a car that hides its eyes, but it can't hide its soul. And that soul is the reason we're still talking about it 60 years later. The headlights are gone, the vacuum hoses are dry, and the diaphragms have cracked. But the mystery remains. And that mystery will never drop down.